Welcome to LOA Today. Walt Thiessen and life coach Cindy Chavez here. Today is Wednesday, November the 28th, 2018. It is 4 p.m. New York time, 1 p.m. Los Angeles time, 9 p.m. London time, and in Sydney, Australia area, it is currently 8 a.m. Good morning if you're from that area. Welcome to our program. If you're listening live, especially on the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group in Facebook, where we are doing a regular schedule now of broadcasting all of our podcasts as we go. And today we're continuing once again what we were talking about this morning. We're looking at the Neville Goddard books, and particularly The Power of Awareness. And we're up to chapter 7, which is actually kind of a record for us, Cindy, because I think all the other books that we had fewer than like 4 or 5 chapters. So we're like in unfound territory now.
Right. And we did a whole chapter this morning.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's a record too.
That is too. Yeah, we don't often go that far, do we?
Yeah, we won't talk about how short it was, but we did cover the whole thing.
Well, we don't need to talk about how short it is because they're all short. It doesn't matter how short they are. It's just a matter of, how much time we're going to spend on, individual paragraphs and sentences and what does that word mean and where's the Neville decoder ring?
Right. And I'm in no hurry. This is like one of those things I enjoy so much that I'm not in a hurry to get through it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm with you.
And
on that.
I love all the questions that are coming in and the comments, the wisdom.
Yeah. We have a pretty smart audience. That's the one thing that I think sticks out to me more than anything else. We have people who are very aware. They're knowledgeable. They've studied. They've gotten to know the subject really, really well. And so
right.
That's why half the time it's more like, what can they teach us rather than what we can teach them, right?
It's great. I love it. I love the conversation.
I do too. Yeah, it's really good.
Really good.
It makes it fun, especially when we get questions too, because that just kind of stretches our abilities and says, okay, let's see, how far can we take our understanding here? Can we give a new insight perhaps that we hadn't thought of before? Perhaps they hadn't thought of before.
Right.
And it's fun. It's a fun process.
Yeah. When you said a minute ago, start typing in
right
before we started, and you were talking to the Facebook group and said, Go ahead and start asking your questions. I kind of got a little excited. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's where the fun's at. Well, actually, so far we're a little bit quiet, so we'll just have to get started and wait for everybody to catch up with us. But that's all right.
We will get started.
We will get started anyway.
Would you like to dive in and then take a break for announcements, or do you want to
let's
lead
do that.
off with the announcements?
No, let's do that. Yeah, let's get started. Let's have the right attitude about this, because that's the name of the chapter.
That's it. We are reading in The Power of Awareness by Neville Goddard. We're in chapter 7, and the chapter title is Attitude.
Mm.
Attitude. When I read that word, it reminded me of, I don't know when, decades and decades ago, it was a thing for people to talk about an attitude adjustment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I need an attitude adjustment. Okay.
Yes.
So Neville says experiments recently conducted. So I think he's writing this in 1944, maybe 45.
When did this book come out?
Now I can't remember.
Let me see if I can find out when this book came out. I think it was in the 50s, actually. But let's see. It was published in 1952.
Okay. 52.
So.
All right. So he's
not so
talking
recent.
about, he says recently, but we're talking about 70 years ago.
Right.
So here's what I want to suggest. If you're in the group and you're watching this or listening live and you can type, if you're a scientist and you have anything to add here to this research, please tell us.
Right.
But Neville says experiments conducted by Merrill Lawrence at Princeton and Adelbert Ames at Dartmouth in the latter's psychology laboratory at Hanover, New Hampshire, prove that what you see when you look at something depends not so much on what is there as on the assumption you make when you look.
Mm-hmm.
Since what we believe to be the real physical world, real is in quote marks, so real physical world is actually only an assumptive world, it's not surprising that these experiments prove that what appears to be solid reality is actually the result of expectations or assumptions. Your assumptions determine not only what you see, but also what you do, For they govern all your conscious and subconscious movements toward the fulfillment of themselves. Over a century ago, this truth was stated by Emerson as follows: as the world was plastic and fluid in the hands of God, so it is ever to so much of his attributes as we bring to it. To ignorance and sin, it is flint. They adapt themselves to it as they may. But in proportion as a man has anything in him divine, the firmament flows before him and takes his signet and form. I think Neville winds that up by saying your assumption is the hand of God molding the firmament into the image of that which you assume. Mm-hmm. So once again, Neville is likening the imagination to the power of God, or to God itself, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which he says your assumption now, assuming that certain things are true, the assumption of the wish fulfilled is the high tide which lifts you easily off the bar of the senses where you have so long lain stranded.
Yeah. Mm.
Some of us might know that feeling of staying in the same place for so long and feel stranded there. So once again, he is going back to the idea of assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Mm-hmm. He says that's the high tide which lifts you easily off the bar of the senses. That's such a great picture, right? Stuck on a sandbar out there waiting for the high tide to come move you.
Yep. Interesting too. Before you go on, I want to make a mention, because the chapter started off with a reference to these two researchers, Merle Lawrence and Adelbert Ames at Princeton and Dartmouth, who did these laboratory experiments that were psychological experiments. Actually, they were perception experiments. And the only thing I wanted to mention about that is at almost exactly the same time period, there were similar experiments being done in the world of quantum physics that led to the revelation that whatever is going to happen at the atomic and subatomic level is going to happen dependent upon whether or not someone's observing it. And I just think it's fascinating. They're doing this. They're basically drawing the same kind of conclusions in an entirely different field, in an entirely different kind of experiment. But they're drawing the same kinds of conclusions that the quantum physicists were drawing at the same time. Just mentioning that.
Right. When I read it, I thought about it. Reminded me of Schrödinger's cat. Right. Which is probably an experiment. Exactly. I'm not sure when that experiment took place, but we're probably most of us familiar with it. And I thought that's kind of the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. That expectation.
That's right. Yeah, it was just a few years before, but it was within the same decade or so. It was in the same general time frame, let's put it that way.
So Neville says about that tide that lifts us off the sandbar, he says it lifts the mind into prophecy in the full right sense of the word. And if you have that controlled imagination and absorbed attention, which it is possible to attain, you may be sure that all your assumption implies will come to pass. Now, this is interesting. I think he's going back to what we read in the chapter previous. Controlled imagination and absorbed attention. And he points out it is possible to attain this, which makes me think, okay, he's stressing that because for some of us it might seem impossible, but he says it's possible. He says, when William Blake wrote, "What seems to be is to those to whom it seems to be," he was only repeating the eternal truth. There is nothing unclean of itself, but to him that esteemeth anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. Because there's nothing unclean of itself, you should assume the best and think only of that which is lovely and of a good report. It's not superior insight, but ignorance of this law of assumption. If you read into the greatness of men some littleness with which you may be familiar, or into some situation or circumstance an unfavorable conviction, your particular relationship to another influences your assumption with respect to that other and makes you see in him that which you do see. So I know this language gets a little convoluted, but he's basically talking about seeing what we expect to see and talking about how we view other people. I notice, if someone tells me something about someone whom I've never met, I may go into my first meeting with that person drawing certain conclusions that may not even be true.
Sure.
But because I had some expectation about this person or some seed of, something planted in my mind about that person.
Right. Yep.
And Neville's talking about how important it is here to recognize what we're creating with our expectation, with our assumption is the word he's using.
Right. Yeah, it's true. And that assumption makes all the difference in the world. Interesting thing, and I'm not sure if it's totally connected to this, but I wanted to mention it anyway because Neville's the one who emphasizes what you should be doing as you're getting ready to go to sleep at night. In fact, just this morning we were talking about the exercise of where you basically play your day backwards. Starting with you just climbed into bed and working back to you just got out of bed in the morning. And that, I guess that stuck with me because as I was working through my day, I got to a point in the day where I had a lot of things to do on my plate, but for some reason I just needed to stop, and I couldn't tell you why. I just needed to stop. And I'd gotten a copy of, I don't know if you've ever heard this. Have you ever heard the recording of Abraham in dialogue with Wayne Dyer while he was still alive?
I own it. Yeah, someone sent it to me as a gift. Actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you know that one.
It's fabulous.
It's great. It's an excellent dialogue. Yeah, really good. I started listening to that and got about like through the first disc and onto part of the second disc. And Abraham, I don't even remember why they started doing this, but Abraham started talking about, or I guess Abraham was answering a question that Wayne had raised about programming your subconscious mind. And Abraham's response was, we wouldn't do it that way. I mean, you can do what you want, but that's not what we would recommend for getting onto the high-flying disc. What we would recommend, they said, and this is me translating it, we recommend that when you wake up in the morning, as soon as you awake, and I mean within seconds, before you've had a chance to process anything, like within the first 14, 17 seconds, like that 17-second interval that they talk about, within that first 17 seconds, if you can gain the wherewithal, so to speak, to just reach out for the high-flying disc, just whatever you can do in that time period to just reach out for it. That's, they say, is going to be your best time in the day to do that. And they point out it could take you a week, it could take you 20 days, it could take you 50 days, 60, 70 days before you finally succeed. Doesn't matter. Just keep going at it every single day, because their emphasis was, if you just keep trying to do it every day, one of these days you're going to get it. And when you get it, when you get to that place, you're going to hook in. And each day that you hook in, it's kind of like what happened one time when I was a kid. We have cats now, and growing up we had cats as well. The first cat that we got, we called her Candy. She was a calico. And we got her at 6 weeks. And when we got her into the house, she was getting used to this. We had this big old colonial house, 3-story house, so lots of room for her to run around in. She's this little tiny kitten. She would come up into my brother's and my room, and we had a dresser in there that stood about, I'm going to say, 5.5 feet off the ground. So it was pretty high. And she decided at the age of 6 weeks that her mission was going to be to leap from the floor to the top of that dresser. Now, first time she tried, she got up about a foot. But she was not deterred. First of all, the dresser was next to my brother's bed, so she learned how she could jump onto the mattress and then try to work on jumping her way up the rest of the way. And she mastered that after a while. But she was still determined to get there from the ground. And I swear my brother and I would go to school or, whatever throughout the day, so we wouldn't be there. But I swear she was practicing throughout the day. And every day we would see her progress. We could mark her progress. And after about 3 or 4 days of this, she could jump high enough that she could just kind of get her paw to touch the top of the thing, and then she'd slide back down to the ground. And then she'd turn around immediately and rush right up and jump right up and try it again. And you could just see her making progress, getting a little bit higher each time until finally she actually got a toehold up there, and she was able to hold it for a moment, and then she fell to the ground. And then the next time she jumped up, she got 2 paws up on there, and she almost got it. And then, after a couple more days of this, she finally had this leap, this massive, mighty leap, grabbed a hold at the top and just pulled herself up there. And finally, I got on top of the dresser. And she was the most proud cat you have ever met in your life. She was preening. She was marching back and forth. Her tail was in the air. She was purring loudly. She was celebrating like it was no tomorrow. And that's what I was thinking about. Total dedication, total persistence. And that's what I was thinking about when I heard what Abraham was saying. They said, just keep going at it and just keep, try to go a little bit higher every morning. Those first 10 seconds, first 15 seconds every morning, just try to go a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. And so
when you talked about that, I had this picture in my mind of waking up. And the second I wake up, this high-flying disc goes zooming by and I have to hop on it. It's like,
wait, come back.
Oops. Try again tomorrow.
Meanwhile, the Wizard of Oz is on the disc saying, I can't come back. I don't know how it works.
Oh, persistence.
Persistence, that's it. Oh, but I was thinking about that, and I'm not sure how Neville would respond to it, especially in light of what he's saying here, but it just occurred to me that in one sense, there's actually no conflict, because Neville was not actually trying to program the subconscious mind at night in order to do something. He was trying to program the mind to be able to focus better. That's one of the things we took away from this morning's talk, that all that practice about playing the day back in your mind, one step at a time, was really about maintaining your focus and sharpening your focus over time. So in that sense, I think there's a correlation to the story of my kitten trying to jump on top of the dresser.
Right. He did mention that it was not an easy thing.
Right. He did.
And that you had to stay with it. So yeah, it makes total sense.
So now I'm trying to kind of connect all that to what Neville's saying here, and I'm not quite sure where the connection is, but I just felt like I should bring it out there because it was a big part of my day. And anytime, there are no coincidences, right? So even if I can't see what the connection is, I thought I'd bring it up. Maybe you'd see the connection, or maybe one of our listeners would see the connection.
Well, there's definitely a thread there, right? Because everything we're talking about, I mean, like he just said, a few sentences back about it's not impossible, which tells me that he's letting us know it's not impossible, or, it is possible, because to some of us it feels like, ooh, it feels impossible. And that's like the little kitten. Yeah. A kitten, a tiny 6-week-old kitten jumping up and landing on something that's 5 feet tall. Right. Might seem impossible. And so it reminded me when you talked about that of the emotional scale and how we often, encourage people to take that small hop, not to try to leap to the top. You get better and better at reaching the top quicker and quicker. Right. But you have to start somewhere. And I think it's in line with what Neville is talking about in this whole book, which is all of these things are possible. And they also take extreme focus and attention. And what we're talking about now in this chapter, attitude, I think they all weave together pretty closely. Right?
Yeah, I think they do. By the way, Jeffrey asked an interesting question, too, that I wanted to answer. He says, do either of you go back to sleep if you wake up on a low-flying disc? And the answer is yes, I do. I do that. I mean, it doesn't always work because, and this is where I think it's really important to understand what Abraham is talking about, because they say the reason you want to go for it during those first 10 to 15 seconds is because you've just spent the night letting your mind just relax and let go of stuff. You're in your least resistance state after that long night of sleep. So that's the real purpose for doing it when you first wake up. Now, I don't know about you. I found that if I wake up and I'm really low flying and I miss that first 15-second window and so forth, I do try to go back to sleep, but it doesn't help me a whole lot. It helps me some. I feel like I got more sleep. But in terms of getting on the high-flying disc, it helps me minimally. What's your experience? Do you get that, or do you have a better experience? Or maybe you don't even do that. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like I don't really wake up on a low-flying disc very often. Now, I wake up in the night sometimes, especially the last few years. Wake up in the night, and I use a lot of these processes if I wake up in the night. I mean, I figure... I was actually reading a book about dreaming, and it was mentioning, and it's like maybe the third or fourth time I've read this idea somewhere. It's talking about that. I I don't know how far back in history we're going. I want to say maybe back before we had electricity, but not, 1,000 years, maybe a couple hundred years. I don't know. But they said that it was very common for people to sleep for 4 hours and then wake up for 2 hours and get up and do things and then go back and sleep like the second sleeping shift. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of funny because I thought, oh, okay, well, that's what I had been doing, but I am not one of those people that gets up when they can't sleep and, like goes and does something productive. Mm-hmm. Not physically anyway. I'm trying to be productive metaphysically. Yeah. So when I wake up and I have an hour or two on occasion where I'm awake, I've just decided to use that time to use Neville methods, to meditate, to, it's like, hey, I might as well be conscious about what I'm using instead of laying there being frustrated that I can't sleep, because who wants to be frustrated? That's just an energy level. I don't want to create more of whatever that is. Yeah,
that's the low-flying disc. That's the last thing you want.
Okay, so I don't generally do that too much. And as far as going back to sleep, of course, if you wake up in the middle of the night, that's usually your aim is to go back to sleep. Mm-hmm. But as far as waking up in the morning, if I go back to sleep, it's usually because I'm wanting to have a dream. Oh. So I'll look at the clock and I'll think, oh yeah, a sleep cycle is about 45 minutes to an hour for most people. Mm-hmm. So I'll look at the clock and think, okay, I have time for one more. One more sleep cycle. Mm-hmm. So, but I haven't had that low-flying disc experience. I'm not saying I never experience a low-flying disc. I just don't usually wake up with it.
Which is good. That's a good thing, because what it really means is that you're generally in a good feeling place. Maybe not as high as you'd want to be, but overall, on average, you're in a good feeling place. So you don't have this expectation of waking up and, it's all going to start all over again, which is definitely the wrong kind of feeling to have anyway. So that's a good thing. That's good.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I never thought about it. That's why I love these questions. I never thought about it until right now. But possibly it's because of all the work, and this work included, that we've been talking about for the last months now. Mm-hmm. The Neville work. Possibly it's because I consistently, I'm committed to doing this work as I fall asleep. So I'm usually falling asleep, assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. I'm usually falling asleep, being who I want to be, right?
Right.
Like, I'm not going to sleep in a bad place, worrying about things. I'm not saying I never worry. Yeah. But I have been very consistent in my practice. So, when I go to sleep, if I recognize that I'm worried about something, or that I'm frustrated, or that hasn't been the best day, I do whatever alignment work I can and make sure that as I'm falling asleep, I'm in alignment with what I want, with how I want to feel. Maybe that's why I usually don't wake up that way.
Makes sense. Why not?
Yeah, because I'm telling you, the first time I read that from Neville, where he says, that sleep is the gateway to the subconscious, and your subconscious is creating everything. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh my goodness. So what happens when we worry ourselves to sleep?
Yeah,
like, exactly. I don't want to be 8 hours of my subconscious creating more things for me to worry about. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. So I got really serious about doing this work at that point.
Well, interesting you should mention that, though, because in that same talk with Wayne Dyer, Abraham mentioned that they don't get too excited about this whole thing about programming your mind when you go to sleep, unless it's a continuation of what you were doing in your day. Because if throughout your day you were focused on emotional level 4, and now all of a sudden you're going to try to program yourself to be emotional level 12, you might as well not bother. You just already programmed it by being on 4 all the time. Successful. Yeah.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I agree with that.
Now, one thing I am curious about is trying to see, I'm going to start doing the play your day back like Neville was talking about. I'm going to start that tonight. Yeah. And then just before I go to sleep, after I've done that, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to program into my mind, if I can, when I wake up, the very first thing that is going to happen as soon as I'm conscious is I'm going to reach for that high-flying disc.
Yeah.
And see if that helps.
right?
You know, because if you can program to a certain degree, why not program that? The one thing we want more than anything else.
Right. And remember this, is that anytime we set an intention for something like that, sometimes we miss it the first few times.
Exactly.
And then what we start realizing is, but we remember after the fact, might be 11 o'clock in the morning and we think, I didn't even think about the high-flying disc until now.
Mm-hmm.
But as we keep making the intention, pretty soon we'll start remembering the second, by 10 a.m. and pretty soon the second we wake up. So,
which was Abraham's point. That's why Abraham said it could take 20 nights, it could take 50 nights, it could take 60 nights before you finally get one right. But, just keep at it. And very similar to what we talked about with Neville this morning. We said we might not be able to play the whole day backward. We may forget what happened between 2 and 5. But if we keep trying to do it anyway every single day, we'll get better and better at it.
Yeah. It was really difficult for me at first. It was like, oh my goodness, because the detail.
Yeah.
But it gets easier. I'm going to try it again. It's probably going to be.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to try it again.
That's good.
All right.
Okay.
So let's see.
Yep.
We
should do our messages before we get too far here. So.
Well, let's do them now, and then we'll dive back into this.
Yeah, paragraph. Let's do that. First and foremost, if you're not a subscriber, what are you waiting for? All the links are in most of the places where you can find this podcast recording, or if you're listening live in the Facebook group, there are links there as well. If you can't find the links, just go to the homepage, loatoday.net. You'll find 2 great big icons there to be clicked on, one for Android, one for Apple phones and iPads and so forth, and just follow the steps from there, and you'll be automatically subscribed, and all of the episodes will come right to your smartphone and smart device or whatever it is every single day that we make them. And once you are subscribing and listening regularly, every time that by the way, you have to listen regularly. There's no point in subscribing if you're not going to listen. So come on, get with the program. but once you're listening, every time you're listening, put something out on social media, because like I've been trying to point out lately, that's how you found it. Somebody, either it was us, live streaming it to the Facebook group, or somebody put it out there on social media they were listening, or in some way somebody used the social media to put out there that this thing's available and you found out about it. So do somebody else a favor. Pass it along to them through, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is that you use. LinkedIn, I don't care what you're using. Use all of them, but just put it out there every single time, because we want more and more people to find out about it. And then finally, contact us. Tell us stuff. If you're a member of the group, join us for the live stream and share comments there, or just send emails, or go through the website. There's a contact form, but whatever. Send us your questions or comments, or maybe manifestations that you're sharing. Whatever, because we like to share all that stuff on the program as well. So there they are. Absolutely. 3 messages for the day.
Yes. Very good. Thank you.
Yep.
And yes, keep those cards and letters coming.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. So Neville is talking in this particular paragraph about the way he phrases this, if you read into the greatness of men some littleness with which you may be familiar.
That's very old-fashioned terminology there.
Yeah. If you can change your opinion of another, then what you now believe of him cannot be absolutely true, but is only relatively true. The following is an actual case history illustrating how the law of assumption works.
Oh, good. Another story. I like that.
I love stories.
Me too.
One day, a costume designer described to me her difficulties in working with a prominent theatrical producer. She was convinced that he unjustly criticized and rejected her best work, and that often he was deliberately rude and unfair to her. Upon hearing her story, I explained that if she found the other rude and unfair, it was a sure sign that she, herself, was wanting, and that it was not the producer, but herself, that was in need of a new attitude. That's the attitude adjustment, right?
Right.
I told her that the power of this law of assumption and its practical application could be discovered only through experience, and that only by assuming that the situation was already what she wanted it to be, she could prove that she could bring about the change desired. Her employer was merely bearing witness, telling her by his behavior what her concept of him was. I suggested that it was quite probable that she was carrying on conversations with him in her mind, which were filled with criticism and recriminations. There was no doubt that she was mentally arguing with the producer, for others only echo that which we whisper to them in secret.
Interesting phrase.
I asked her if it was not true that she talked to him mentally, and if so, what those conversations were like. She confessed that every morning on her way to the theater, she told him just what she thought of him in a way she would never have dared address him in person.
Yeah. Done that one.
The intensity and force of her mental arguments with him automatically established his behavior towards her. She began to realize that all of us carry on mental conversations, but unfortunately, on most occasions, these conversations are argumentative.
They are.
That we have only to observe the passerby on the street to prove this assertion, that so many people are mentally engrossed in conversation, and few appear to be happy about it. But the very intensity of their feeling must lead them quickly to the unpleasant incident they themselves have mentally created and therefore must now encounter. When she realized what she'd been doing, she agreed to change her attitude and to live this law faithfully by assuming that her job was highly satisfactory and her relationship with the producer was a very happy one. To do this, she agreed that before going to sleep at night, on her way to work, and at other intervals during the day, she would imagine that he had congratulated her on her fine designs and that she in turn had thanked him for his praise and kindness. To her great delight, she soon discovered for herself that her own attitude was the cause of all that befell her.
That's a good
The
story.
behavior of her employer miraculously reversed itself. His attitude, echoing as it had always done, that which she had assumed, now reflected her changed concept of him. What she did was by the power of her imagination. Her persistent assumption influenced his behavior and determined his attitude toward her. With the passport of desire on the wings of a controlled imagination, she traveled into the future of her own predetermined experience.
It's an interesting thing about that story. A couple things that are interesting about it. First one is depending on who he were to have that interaction with, she was actually willing to, consider the possibility that she maybe had been behind it. But the simple fact is, he never contradicted the idea that the guy she was working with was rude to her. He probably was rude to her. Right. He probably was very rude to her, and that's what people will most often hang on to. But he really was being rude. You don't get this. You don't understand. He was being mean. He was being mean-spirited. He was treating me in ways that nobody should ever be treated. And it's probably true. But who initiated? That's the question. And it seems so strange, but how could this be? How could it be that she would initiate that? That's what seems so impossible to us when we're first considering this kind of thing.
But remember, we read this paragraph before where he talked about if we are to reflect, some littleness that we know of, right? And it reminded me of just times that people have said something about someone else that a person we don't even know, something derogatory.
Right.
Oh, do you know so-and-so? No, I don't. Oh, well, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, right.
So now we've got that in our head, right? And then we meet them and we may, already have a preconceived idea of how we think they're going to behave.
Exactly.
But now, when this whole idea comes up, and I say this more than anyone, so I'm not, like I always say, the whole world is a mirror of what's going on with ourselves. It's a mirror of our self-love. It's a mirror of, right? But the thing I always want to make sure, because when I'm a relationship coach, so when this comes up about the way other people behave towards us, do I think our attitude plays into it? Yes. Do I think that the whole universe is a mirror of how we love ourselves? Yes, I do. And I also think that it's important that we have boundaries in place, right? And that if you're in a relationship and there's any kind of abuse going on, emotional abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, that it's not your fault, right? It's like that's the only thing I never like about this message when it comes up, is the idea of, well, you're creating it.
Right.
Okay, that's okay for us to say, how am I supporting this behavior? This person is treating me badly. What part do I play in it?
Mm-hmm.
What part can I own?
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing that I learned is that sometimes part of it has to do with the way we treat ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Right? In other words, if you're in a relationship with someone and they're treating you badly, and you're allowing it and you're tolerating it, part of that is maybe because you don't have enough self-respect.
Mm-hmm.
Because I use this example all the time, right? But you might not even let somebody treat your little dog that way.
Yeah, true.
But you're letting him treat you that way.
Yeah.
Right? She says he was rude to her. So part of it is, with me, I get real practical here. And yes, I believe in magic and I believe in changing my own attitude. I believe everything's a reflection. And I also believe in saying, you know what? The way you're treating me right now is not okay.
Yeah. Well,
this is not okay.
I don't think that's inconsistent at all. I think it's actually part and parcel. I really don't think you can put out what it is you want without making it clear what you don't want, especially if you have to make it clear verbally to somebody else saying, no, you are not allowed to cross this line. And
sometimes, you know, it's funny because, you know, Abraham says this thing about, yes, if you have enough focus and intention and you are, you know, really trained your mind to do this kind of work, you probably can manifest a 5-star meal at a McDonald's. But it's probably just easier to go to a 5-star restaurant.
Oh, that takes all the fun out of it.
That's the way I sort of look at this. It's like, okay, I can get introspective. Mm-hmm. I can realize that I'm playing a part in this too. You know, in the Course of Miracles, I think there's an idea of everybody's just playing a role for me.
Oh, yeah, right.
Right? Okay, so we're all just playing a role. I understand it. I'm playing into this too. There's part of this I can own. And part of it might be that I let people walk all over me. And that I never say, hey, you know, that's not okay. Sometimes that's the easy way. That's going to the 5-star restaurant. Instead of trying to manifest a 5-star meal at McDonald's by doing this energetic work. But yet, at other times, it works quick and easy, just like this. She changed her attitude, and the guy was different.
By the way, I want to also mention something about boundaries that gets overlooked sometimes. And you probably run into this as a coach. So often when people talk about setting a boundary, they said it the way we just talked about. No, you are not allowed to cross this line. Do not give me that kind of behavior. That's not acceptable. And that's the way we normally do it. But it's really helpful, I think, to remember that that is an expression of a negative. If we really want something, we have to express it positively. So the better way, in my opinion, is to say, instead of, you are not allowed to behave this way, you're not allowed to cross that line, turn it into, this is what I expect from you. I expect you to treat me this way. I expect you to treat me with respect. I expect you to, you know, and here's what I expect of you. And lay it out positively, because now you're putting out a very clear vibrational signal to the universe, and the universe has to respond to that.
The most important thing to remember about boundaries is that when you create a boundary, it's for you.
Yes.
Your boundary is to keep you safe. Your boundary is to keep you comfortable. Your boundary is to keep you having an experience that you want to have.
Right.
It's not to change the behavior of someone else.
Right.
If we decide we're going to make a boundary because we want somebody's behavior to change, then if they keep on doing what they're doing, then we feel like our boundary hasn't worked. Right? It's like, well, I set a boundary and they keep doing whatever it is. So I like to use this example. I use the example of a restaurant down the street, and maybe I go there every day, and there's a sign on the door that says they close at 6:30, but I don't close my office till 6:30, and then I walk down, and so I don't get there till 6:45, and they're closed. But I always knock, and they come let me in. They smile. They ask me to come in. They serve me a beautiful meal. See, I must be special, right? But in the back, they're all grousing about me being there. Oh, she always shows up late. I just want to go home. Can't we get this over with? What are they doing? They're putting a smile on their face, and they're tolerating me.
Exactly.
And if at some point they say, we're sorry, we can't, if you want to have dinner here, you have to get here before we close. And they don't come answer the door.
Yes.
Well, I might still come down there and knock every day, right? I might knock every day. So they haven't changed my behavior.
That's
and
right.
if they were to say, we hung the sign on the door, she still keeps coming. And they think our boundaries don't work. She's still here. Well, that's because you made the boundary thinking it would change me.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
But if you make the boundary and just say, look, the sign's on the door, we're not going to answer the door. We're going to clean up and go home because that's the experience we want.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've created a boundary that's working.
My wife, Louise, when she was a psychotherapist for 10 years, and during that time period, she had one particular exercise that she told me about that I really love, that she would use with somebody to help them understand boundaries. And that was she had very comfortable room that she was in. They had a couch, they had a chair, and so forth. Throw pillows, all that kind of thing. And at one point, she was trying to explain this concept, she would make sure she was sitting opposite the person, grab one of the throw pillows, and say, "Okay, catch," and toss the pillow to them. The other person would catch it. She'd say, "Okay, now throw it back to me." So they throw it back. She'd catch it. She says, "Okay, catch it again." She threw it again, caught it again. And then she'd say, "Okay, now throw it back." They would throw it back. And this time, instead of catching it, she'd let it fall to the ground. And she'd say, "The game just ended because I refused to play."
Right. Exactly.
That's it.
That's exactly it. Right. And so why is that? It's not to change the other person.
That's
it's
right.
to give me the experience I want to have. I don't want to play anymore.
Exactly. You don't have to keep playing the game. You can just stop.
All right. See how we went off on this tangent, but I love this.
It's a good one. It's a very good tangent.
All right. So let's see where we left off, because
where
now
were
I
we?
can't remember.
I'm not sure either. Let's see.
I usually highlight it, and I didn't this time. Okay, I see it. So Neville says, thus we see it's not facts, but that which we create in our imagination, which shapes our lives. For most of the conflicts of the day are due to the want of a little imagination to cast the beam out of our own eye. And I actually think this fits right in with this conversation of boundaries.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Instead of continuing to, here's the other part of it, is that she was tolerating some kind of behavior from this producer. She tolerated it. And then she complained about it mentally with that mental argument. Boy, have I been there before.
Yeah. We all have.
And so when she changed her attitude, part of that is that we just don't really tolerate the behavior anymore.
Exactly.
It's one of the things that I like to remember about law of attraction is that as soon as we start tolerating stuff, and it doesn't really even matter what we're tolerating, whether it's another person, a relationship thing, whether it's some other thing, as soon as we get into that zone of toleration, our manifesting power really dims. I don't really know why, but I think it's an energy, right? Just an energy. I think if we're tolerating something, we're kind of stepping back into victim energy, and we cannot be a creator and a victim at the same time.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so he says it's the exact, and this is interesting. It is the exact and literal minded who live in a fictitious world.
That's interesting.
As this designer, by her controlled imagination, started the subtle change in her employer's mind, so can we, by the control of our own imagination and wisely directed feeling, solve our problems.
Yeah, that line, it is the exact and literal minded who live in a fictitious world. More precisely, they are victims of a fictitious world. They are trapped in it because they are assuming that the only thing that's available to them is what is real.
What is hard facts.
Hard fact.
Talked about
that's it. Just hard fact.
It's like, and I can imagine, I've experienced it. People saying, this is just how this person is.
Yep.
Okay, well, there's a couple things to do here. One is change who you are. And it's really, again, if we look at it that way, we're connecting it back to identity again.
That's right.
Because in the first part of the story, she was a victim. Who was her identity? Her identity was somebody that worked really hard and was not appreciated.
Exactly.
And she started changing her identity into someone who was appreciated. And that made all the difference.
Yeah. Yep.
So he says, as this designer, by her controlled imagination, started the subtle change in her employer's mind, so can we, by the control of our own imagination and wisely directed feeling, solve our problems. By the intensity of her imagination and feeling, The designer cast a kind of enchantment on her producer's mind and caused him to think that his generous praise originated with him. Often our most elaborate and original thoughts are determined by another. We should never be certain that it was not some woman treading in the winepress who began that subtle change in men's mind, or that the passion did not begin in the mind of some shepherd boy, lighting up his eyes for a moment before it ran upon its way. William Butler Yeats.
Apparently Yeats understood that concept real well.
I think Neville quotes Yeats a lot, and a lot of times it's really deep concepts that he's quoting. So I think that this whole topic is very interesting because part of it can be dealt with in a metaphysical way, and that is by changing our own identity, changing our own imagination of what we want to experience, changing our own attitude because of that reflective nature of relationship. I mean, this is an easy experiment to try. If you live with someone and they come home, be grouchy and see what happens, or be happy and see what happens. Our energy entrains to itself. So we do have an effect. Our energy level has an effect on other people.
I recommend the second experiment more than the first one, but I get your point.
Yes. But the other thing is that if this is a situation that's ongoing, there are other things that we can do as well, and that's just communicate. Right? I think that's just as important than, now we are talking about a person and a client here, a boss and a client. So that might be a little different than more intimate relationships. But I wouldn't suggest tolerating abusive behavior from anyone.
No, including almost especially an employer. Because, I mean, first of all, if you're in an employer-employee relationship where the employer is abusive, the first question that comes to my mind is, why are you staying? I mean, you're not an indentured servant, are you? So why are you still there? That's my first thought. But if you're going to insist on being there, then at least start shifting things around. Set the boundaries. Be clear about what it is that you want, and make it clear to him. So that when you make it clear to him, you're making it clear to yourself, and the whole dialogue changes at that point. So that's the thing people forget. When we change the way we behave toward others, especially if we do it for the positive, but it works either way. It changes the way we treat ourselves. It changes the way we feel about ourselves, and it changes the whole dynamic of the relationship.
That's the most important part.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I think Neville almost doesn't bring out here.
Right.
Is the identity
he
part
infers
of it.
Yeah.
Right? It's the identity part of it. So what are we changing? We're changing our experience.
Right.
We're changing who we are. And suddenly we're not that person that gets mistreated. We're not that person that isn't appreciated. We want to step into the place of being the person whose work is greatly appreciated. That's one of the things that I often communicate to clients is that if something's not working for you, I want to know. Right?
Absolutely.
I want to know because I only want clients who are raving fans.
Yes.
I only want clients who are getting fantastic results.
Exactly.
I don't want the client who pretends that they're okay with me because they don't want to say something negative and doesn't bring up some issue that they want to fix and then leaves and never hires me again and says, well, I don't know, it was all right. Right?
Yeah,
no,
right.
I want to know, how can I do better?
Yeah.
And that's the communication part, what from this woman in this story, that's what I hear. I hear this piece that is a little bit missing. And there's the, look, I keep bringing you my best work and you don't seem to like it. How can we change this situation? How can we change this dynamic? I see that part missing.
Yeah. And as someone who's been on the other side of the picture, someone who's been a manager and even a business owner, I know what it's like to have somebody come to me and say, look, this isn't working. For me, it's like, thank God they told me. I am so glad to hear that.
Yes. Right. Exactly. And so, I think it all plays a part. The communication, the boundaries, and of course, our attitude's going to make a huge difference.
Exactly. Yeah.
A big difference.
Yep. We got time left. Do you want to try to get into chapter 8? They're all short, I know, but this one's really short.
Is it? Well, let's see.
It's
Do we
called
have any
renunciation.
questions?
Well, that's comments. People liking what we're saying. No real questions. I'll take another look here, but I don't really see any. But
Okay.
but they're on board with what we're saying, so that's good.
Well, let's go into chapter 8. I bet we can finish it.
All
We've
right,
got 11 minutes, and
give it a
it's
shot.
pretty short.
Yep.
All right. The title of the chapter is Renunciation.
Mm-hmm.
There is no coal of character so dead that it will not glow and flame if but slightly turned.
Mm-hmm.
Resist not evil.
Mm-hmm.
Whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also.
Definite biblical reference there.
Right. There is a great difference between resisting evil and renouncing it. When you resist evil, you give it your attention. You continue to make it real. When you renounce evil, you take your attention from it and give your attention to what you want. Now is the time to control your imagination and give beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified. You give beauty for ashes when you concentrate your attention on things as you would like them to be rather than on things as they are. We talked about this morning.
Mm-hmm.
You give joy for mourning when you maintain a joyous attitude regardless of unfavorable circumstances. You give praise for the spirit of heaviness when you maintain a confident attitude instead of succumbing to despondency. In this quotation, the Bible uses the word tree as a synonym for man. You become a tree of righteousness when the above mental states are a permanent part of your consciousness. You are planting. You are a planting of the Lord when all your thoughts are true thoughts. He is I am, as described in chapter 1. I am is glorified when your highest concept of yourself is manifested. When you have discovered your own controlled imagination to be your savior, your attitude will be completely altered without any diminution of religious feeling, and you will say of your controlled imagination, "Behold, this vine, I found it a wild tree, whose wanton strength had swollen into irregular twigs. But I pruned the plant, and it grew temperate in its vain expense of useless leaves, and nodded as you see into these clean, full clusters, to repay the hand that wisely wounded it." They often call a gardener that prunes a tree, they call it wisely wounding it, because you are cutting it, but in doing that, you're cleaning it up, right? You're causing it to grow the way you want.
You're training it, really.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he's talking about here. And he says, by vine is meant your imagination, which in its uncontrolled state expends its energy in useless or destructive thoughts and feelings. But you, just as the vine is pruned by cutting away its useless branches and roots, you prune your imagination by withdrawing your attention from all unlovely and destructive ideas and concentrating on the ideal you wish to attain. The happier, more noble life you will experience will be the result of wisely pruning your own imagination. Yes, be pruned of all unlovely thoughts and feelings, that you may think truly, and thy thoughts shall the world's famine feed. Speak truly, and each word of thine shall be a fruitful seed. Live truly, and thy life shall be a great and noble creed.
This is
Quoting
where
Horatio on our Hymns of Faith and Hope.
this is where I'm glad that we have the Neville decoder ring, because he started bringing in some terms here, and I mean, he actually defined one of them, which was really helpful. He talked about how the tree in the earlier quote was representative of man. So okay, now we got that much figured out. It's kind of like being given the first clue to, unscrambling the scramble or something like that.
Right, and that happens a lot with Neville, and it is a synonym in Scripture to use
True.
trees
Mm-hmm.
as men, a forest, a garden, all of these things, great metaphors. I was actually just having a conversation with somebody right before the podcast talking about using the metaphor of a garden.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that here with, pruning the tree. And he's talking about there was one chapter, Pruning Shears of Revision.
Right.
Where he's talking about revising things that have happened, kind of what he had this woman do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of having that mental argument going on all the time. I mean, all of that's just imagination. He had her prune that imagination into a conversation that was beautiful instead of one that was painful. And
right.
Things started to change.
Yep.
And so he talks about that a lot. He does.
And that the pruning shears are, when he talks about, let's see, where's the exact quote here? Give beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified. Now, when you first read that, I thought to myself, well, first of all, that's very biblical. Second of all, what the bleep is he talking about? Now, he did start to explain later on about how tree is the synonym for man. But the part that was still a little bit confusing was the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. Okay, what's that all about? And later on, as you pointed out, let's see, where is it exactly? He talked about wounding, right? But I pruned the plant, and it grew temperate in its vain expense of useless leaves, and nodded as you see into these clean, full clusters to repay the hand that wisely wounded it. Well, if the tree is man, then what we're really talking about there is man pruning himself. We're talking about man changing his thought pattern, changing his mind, changing the way he's dealing with and thinking and interacting with what's going on around him.
And I love this, that he used this quote, because it says, it grew temperate in its vain expense of useless leaves, and nodded as you see into these clean, full clusters to repay the hand that wisely wounded it. So in other words, if we're wise about how we use our imagination, and we get out those pruning shears, if you will, of revision, and learn how to train our thoughts to where we can focus on the things we want, we're the ones that will be repaid with a manifestation of things that are good, things that we want, things that are enjoyable and pleasant. So that's the whole picture here in this chapter, is just us once again training our mind and our thoughts to where we have control and we have focus. Mm-hmm. It's not an easy thing to do. It takes time. It's like growing a garden.
Right.
That's what my friend and I were talking about, planting seeds. Gardening is dirty work, right? We plant seeds in the dirt, and there are worms in there. And we get our hands dirty, and we dig around, and then we plant them, and the seeds are in the dark, planted in the dark. Mm-hmm. And we walk by that little plot, and we can walk by and walk by and walk by, and nothing's happening, and nothing's happening, and nothing's happening. And we keep watering it, make sure it has sun, and nothing's happening, and nothing's happening. And isn't that what we hear with people who are complaining that they keep doing the work and they're not manifesting what they want?
Yep.
Nothing's
exactly
happening.
Right.
Yeah, I did that, and nothing happened. Mm-hmm. I did that. I'm still not getting what I want. Mm-hmm. Well, one day, if you are faithful to the garden and you keep watering it and you keep giving it sunshine, which is good thoughts, focus, practice, good energy. One day when you walk by, you will see the seed has sprouted suddenly. Oh my goodness, look, it come up, it poked up through the ground, but that seed was down there struggling in the dark, trying to work its way up through the dirt. And, we see a full manifestation. That's the part that people miss. They do the work of planting, and then they want to see the work of manifestation, but there's all that time in the middle where we have to have faith, and we have to believe that's going to happen. And so, hang in there.
Yeah,
do
sure.
the work. Keep watering. Keep giving it sunshine.
And as Herbert points out, the garden we're talking about is actually the mind, so it's the mind garden. And as Jeffrey points out, plant lots of seeds. Just keep putting the seeds in the ground, which is true. I wanted to go back though to that first quote, because that whole thing was kind of like a showstopper for me, trying to grasp what he was saying. The last part in particular, the last part said, "The planting of the Lord, that he might be glorified." That's where the Neville decoder ring comes in really handy, because in other parts of this book and his other books as well, God is us. We're the ones who are playing the role of God in a sense. So you explain it that way. Now all of a sudden, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. Well, that's us planting our own seeds in our own mind so that we can get what we want. And boy, that decoder ring is important.
He says, I I am is glorified when your highest concept of yourself is manifested.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
How does that happen? That's when, when you recognize the reality of your imagination has now hardened into fact.
Exactly right. That's true.
It.
Yep. So this has been good. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but we got 2 chapters done. That's a kind of a record for us.
A new record. It's a new record.
So we'll have to pick it up again next time. Now, of course, we'll be picking up this book next Tuesday morning, so people can hang on to and maybe even do some reading ahead and be ready for it. But I'm looking forward to talk to you at that time about it.
I am too. I'll be back.
All right.
Tuesday.
And we hope that you all will join us as well next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.